Welcome back. Today I am going to discuss Mordheim, City of the Damned. If you're looking for my unit build or my faction build guides, I do have those set up now as well. But some of the subscribers had purchased this game and they were kind of struggling with it, so they asked me to kind of put together a couple little guides together to see if I could help them out. So like I said, I have my recommended faction unit build guides, and you can check those out now that I've completed the series. I thought I would also do just kind of a general ranking because some people were asking me to kind of give a quick summary for that. And then they were also recommending, or requesting I should say, a video just with some basic mechanics since they thought that would be helpful for people as well. So I'll get those uploaded here and then we'll transition to a different series. I'm not sure if I'll move on to kind of some Gladius builds or some other things here. Definitely open for some recommendations if you have some for me, because as you can see, if you request it, I will try to facilitate it on games that I've been playing here. So for today, I'm going to assume that you've purchased all the DLC for this game, because it can be crazy cheap, especially when it's on sale, and that's definitely how I recommend getting this. I think you get it even cheaper maybe if you use like a third-party vendor key distributor, because you should easily be able to get probably this game and all the DLC for maybe 10-15 bucks on a bad day, and probably cheaper than that on a good day for sure. But in terms of my general recommendations, I think in terms of kind of easiest to hardest factions, and some of these can be moved around slightly, and I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a hot take because I know there's a lot of lovers of the Cult of the Possessed, but for me I really struggled with them. So for kind of going easiest, I think the easiest faction for, and this is assuming you're new to this game, if you understand the mechanics and things, then it can kind of shift some of these guys around. But generally, I think the Forces of Chaos are going to be easier than the Forces of Good. So the Forces of Chaos are the three factions on the right side of the screen. You have the Cult of the Possessed, the Skaven, and the Undead. And then you have the Witch Hunters in red, the Mercenaries, and the Sisters of Sigmar is what they're called in the regular Warhammer. I had to think there because Sisters of Battle are what they are in Warhammer 40,000. But the easiest faction by far is the Undead. Then I actually think the Sisters are the second easiest faction for newer players, and I'll kind of go through my reasoning here after I kind of list them here. The third easiest, I think, is going to be the Skaven, and I think that's probably going to be a hot take because I think they can actually be quite challenging to get the game started with the Skaven, but then by medium and or in the middle and late game, they really pop off and become a major powerhouse, followed by the Witch Hunters, then the Human Mercenaries, and I'm going to put the Cult of the Possessed as the very last here. So reasoning for these rankings, and I think it could definitely swap around. You know, you could argue that maybe the Witch Hunters should be moved up and the Skaven should be a little bit harder in terms of the queue, just because of how difficult they can be to start out. But I think long term, I think that makes a lot of sense. So for the Undead, why do I think they're generally the easiest faction? It has to do for several reasons. One is all their heroes are absolutely fantastic. You know, their leader, who is the Vampire Lord here, he has the ability to cause terror, and that causes your opponent to lose 3 offensive points, which are considered the same thing as a AP if you're familiar with these turn-based strategies. And then you also lose your strategic points, which is what you use to move, and then also to use some other skills. So right away there, especially early game when you don't have a lot of your resistances up, these guys can really mess you up and effectively make it so you can't attack or hit them very well, which can be a major downside and allow you to easily farm guys for kills, especially if you start causing them to get afraid and have to do all lone checks, things like that. So overall, he's just incredibly powerful. Then the other hero you get is, I always call her the Vampiress, but I don't think that's what her name is, but there's a female vampire, and now she cannot cause terror, but she does cause fear, and what fear does is reduces the melee hit accuracy of your opponent by 30%, and then both with the terror and then the fear, I think they have to pass checks each turn to overcome that, and if they don't, then the effect persists. So that can be huge, because now all of a sudden you're taking away their offensive points, their strategic points, and then if you have the female vampire there too, now all of a sudden you have a minus 30% chance to hit as well, so you can kind of stack these things on and just go crazy. Now the impressive passive also cause terror, but that's usually how it works for most of the factions as well. But they're not the only ones that have the debuff. You know, you have your ghouls, which are one of your henchmen, and then they have they're considered disease carriers, and how that works is every time they hit, they have a chance to stack, put one stack of the disease carrier on there, and then that can lower initiative, decrease crit resistance, or dodge and parry chances, and then that's stackable. And that can last for, I think, 2 to 3 turns. So if you have a bunch of ghouls and you're just attacking guys and you're just getting all those stacks going like crazy, because by late game you should be getting at least 2 attacks, so you can get 2 stacks per model that's attacking, and it's not uncommon to totally surround a unit with maybe 3-4 units, and all of a sudden you can see how you can really just start tearing guys apart, especially if you have a hero in there as well that's getting additional stacks of terror and fear being applied. They're also incredibly powerful because they have access to dual healing. So you can purchase the Poison Globadier with these guys, and that's, I think, the greatest healing unit in the game, because most of the healing from the other factions is spell based, which means there's a chance to fail the spell just because it is a spell. And 2, for most units that are spellcasters, in this game it's incredibly brutal. Because if you trigger the Curse of Tzeentch, it can do anything from just some negative effects that may last for a few turns, to stunning your unit, to stunning everybody that's around you in an AoE, to just flat out doing 9,999 damage, which is pretty much a one-shot kill for any unit in the game. And and then, you know, if you get a bad roll at the end, that Tzeentch's curse may permanently kill your unit, because permadeath is definitely is a thing in this game. Or you can suffer a critical injury where all of a sudden maybe you can't cast spells as well. You may become stupid, in which case you have to use your intelligence to be able to successfully roll to be able to do anything on your turn. So it can be incredibly detrimental. And with the Poison Globadiers, they just throw their poison globes. They can throw 2 of them. It's an incredibly powerful heal. It's a 100% guaranteed heal to the units that it hits. It can hit both allies and foes, so you have to be a little bit careful when you're throwing them around that you don't start healing your opponents as well. You do get some negative traits from the healing, but they're so minuscule that you'll just be lobbing those grenades everywhere you can to be able to heal, or I should say globes, not grenades. And then you can do it twice, and you can have multiple Globadiers out at once, so then you can just stack heals. Now the only downside is the Globadiers can't heal themselves with the globes because they have globe immunity, because some of the globes actually have negative. You can throw like poison globes, you can throw other globes that cause other kind of debuffs, and so they're immune to it. So unfortunately they can't heal themselves. But again, because they have the guaranteed heal, that's very powerful, because effectively you'll just use everybody to always protect your Globadier, and then he can just heal everybody up while they're defending him and getting kills. Because in this game, I think the most effective way to play is build up tanks and then have lots of healing, and you can just totally outlast your opponents, because the AI in this game is pretty stupid. And so as long as you can get a couple of kills and then get the numbers in your favor, they may have guys that are other places on the map trying to complete objectives, and you can just rush in there and get kills, and then you'll be able to cause a morale check and win the match. Now they also have access to a secondary healer as well, because they have access to the Doomweaver, and he's actually an incredible healer as well. And the thing that's nice about him is how I was talking about how certain spells in the game can cause you to get killed if you get Tzeentch's Curse. Well, this spellcaster is actually immune to Tzeentch's Curse for the immediate kill, and the only ones that can be activated if he triggers it are AoE effects. So that means you'll debuff everybody that's around him. So you'll want to make sure, if you're starting to cast a lot of spells with him and you don't have things to lower the Tzeentch's Curse probability of getting activated, is you probably don't want him to be next to all of your units in case he triggers some of those AoE Tzeentch effects, because, you know, nothing worse than you're winning a battle and then all of a sudden he stuns everybody around him, and then when you get stunned, it's 100% accuracy, and I think your crit resistance also gets reduced, so you can get tons of damage dealt to you, and then the following turn you have to get up, and that'll have your offensive points and strategic points, and so then you're weak for an additional turn while they're getting another round of attacks on you. So it can be absolutely devastating to be stunned on this. But with him, he has the, I can't remember what it's called, like the Idol of Blood or something like that. And what that is he throws down this idol, and then it has an AoE effect, and then any ally unit that's standing inside there, when they're doing melee attacks, every melee attack that they land, they'll heal for a set amount of health, depending on whether you have the standard idle or you've mastered the ability. So that'll give you additional healing. So if you decided to make a melee poison globadier, which I generally don't recommend, I think they're much better at range, and again, watch my unit build guides if you want recommendations on that, they could potentially heal as well if you just switch their weapons, because I would recommend that you always have both a melee and range build for them set up. That way, if they get cornered, they can defend themselves, and that will allow you to give a little more survivability there. Now, the other thing that makes these guys really powerful is they have a really good, impressive unit. You know, he's Crypt Fiend, is it? Or Ghoul or something? I can't remember what they're called. But, you know, he can handle most weapons. He can use either two one-handed weapons or a two-handed weapon. He can take a big hit just like most impressives can. You can heal him up. He causes terror. You know, he can do a ton of damage, and then he can cause other effects too. So he's just a really good impressive unit. The undead can use most items, so there's really minimal item restrictions for them. The only thing that will be a little restricting is you'll need to find yourself a pair of warpstone pistols if you're going to use the globadier as a ranged pistoler, which is what I generally recommend you do, because he has great damage output and he can stay away from the front, and he can throw the healing globes from afar. But otherwise, every other piece of equipment they use is going to be widely available in the game. So as you're killing other war bands and gaining equipment, it's generally not hard to get your guys equipped. And then a lot of your henchmen also have immunity to all alone, fear, and terror checks. And so that just makes the starting and later game just much easier. So what you can do in this game to trigger an all alone is if you have one guy that's all by himself and you run two guys next to him and engage him, then he has to pass an all alone check. And so if there's a way if he fails it, then he'll run away if there's a path to run away. And then when you're when you're fleeing, each unit that's engaging you will get a attack of opportunity, and so that can be significant amounts of damage, and they'll just randomly run in a direction. You can't control them when they're fleeing. And if they're totally surrounded and they can't escape, then it'll just end their turn and they won't be able to do anything there. So it'll allow you to effectively almost like stun lock the unit. And fear, you know, we talked about that and how that can be incredibly detrimental, because there's other units in the game that can cause fear as well, not just your female vampire, and that can be applied to you. So, you know, you don't want to take that 30% chance to hit penalty, because that's pretty huge, especially when characters get to be higher level and they really get their dodge chances and their parry chances up, and they get a lot of armor and a lot of melee resistance. All that will lower your chance to hit pretty dramatically. So add a 30% hit chance on top of that, and that can be absolutely devastating. So they're immune to that, and then they're also immune to terror checks. So that's because one of the faction that's hardest to play against when you're starting out is the vampires, because they have all of those debuffs to you. But as you playing as the undead, you can bypass all those negative traits because a lot of your units have just flat out immunity to it, so that works out really well. Now, there are a couple of downsides to the undead, just like there are on every faction. I think the biggest downside is 50% of their henchmen are zombies. Now, you can just pick and choose which ones to hire, but unless you're going to have a necromancer with you, zombies are absolutely abysmal, because they're dependent on the necromancer buffing them up and giving them increased movement and things like that, because without it they can't move at all. So I tend to just go with a bunch of ghoul armies myself, because they have all those debuff characters. It gives me ability to use other heroes that aren't necromancers, because I wasn't super impressed with the necromancers myself. I think they're kind of one of the weaker sorcerers in the game. However, if you're going to do a zombie horde, then they become absolutely imperative, because you can't have a zombie horde without it. And then the zombies themselves are cheap. They can be incredibly effective, especially as they're being buffed up, because you can turn them into full tanks and they can take a surprising amount of hits and be extremely durable. But again, they're totally dependent on a necromancer, so I think that's just kind of frustrating. Some of the other negative traits is some of your units, even though they have immunity to the all alone flee and terror checks, in exchange for that, some of them can't disengage. They'll fight to the death, and so that can be a little bit frustrating, especially if you don't have healers yet, because there's times where you want to actually disengage somebody strategically to keep them alive, maybe run and go get an item, especially if you're starting to stack up a lot of kills and you know the following turn for your opponent is going to cause a morale check. You may want to snag some of the equipment because you know they may have, you know, uncommon or rare equipment that you want to get, or raid some chests, gather some warpstone, and then because some of these guys don't have the flee ability or disengage ability, you don't have that option. Again, I talked about the Necromancer and how I don't really like him very much, so I think that's kind of a downside. So I think they have one of the weaker spellcasters. And then the other thing that's kind of a downside with them is some of the henchmen don't have the ability to use items, and I should say consumable items. They obviously can use equipment, so that can sometimes be a little bit frustrating, where sometimes you'll want to have some healing potions if you're going to do one of the story campaigns where it's a win or lose situation to progress the game. And especially if you don't have a very strong warband, you may want to use some of those healing potions. Well, some of your henchmen can't use it, and use them to stockpile some of those healing potions, so your other units can run around and pick up items or get supported by the henchmen as they're getting weak. You just have to rely on your stronger characters for those consumables. So for those reasons, I think the Undead's kind of the best faction in the game, hands down. So the second easiest faction that I'd recommend is the Sisters. Now I think kind of each one of these should go a little bit progressively faster because I won't have to explain all these different traits and things, kind of like I did on the first time, just assuming that, again, you're a new player and you don't know how this works. So for the Sisters, I think they're a very easy faction to play because all of their units can be extremely tanky, and their faction can have the greatest amount of spellcasters in the game, because you now have access to 3 different spellcasters. You have your leader can heal with the circle of healing. Your impressive unit can get the circle of healing, and then the purifier, which is another hero you get access to, she has access to circle of healing. And as you can probably guess from the name, circle of healing is healing with an AoE effect and only affects allies. So you can use it twice. So effectively now you could have, if you just have 3 of those units out, you have 6 3, 2, 6. So you'd have oh my gosh, 6 chances of healing. I don't know why I was having so much trouble with that math. 6 healing chances, and you'd have even more if you brought out additional purifiers to heal more. Now, the other thing is, because they're so tanky, almost all of your units can wear heavy armor. Now, unlike traditional spell casting, which is what the Cult of the Possessed used, or what the vampires use, or what the mercenaries use, these guys have kind of the blessings of Sigmar. And so when they're using, because if you're a regular spellcaster, you have to worry about that Tzeentch's Curse, which we talked about. But if you're one of the Sigmar priests, or the Sisters of Battle here, then you have what's called Divine Wrath, and effectively it's the same thing as the Tzeentch's Curse. It's just different spell effects that can be applied to you, and you can still blow yourself up, unfortunately, which I always thought was kind of weird, given that Sigmar is supposed to be, you know, a benevolent god, and yet you can kill yourself with your spellcasting. I think the big thing is, you know, you have to realize that spellcasting in Warhammer is extremely dangerous, and so they can have very negative effects. So because you have all those healers, though, you're going to want to definitely focus on getting formulas that have decrease your Divine Wrath, because that's what their version of Tzeentch's Curse is. And so therefore you need to get lots of Sigmarite weapons. So it's going to be Sigmarite Warhammers, Sigmarite Grade Hammers to decrease that chance. Yeah, but because you're using the Divine Wrath spellcasting version, what's different from the Tzeentch's, other than the effects that you can have if you have a bad roll, is when you're using heavy armor, it doesn't decrease your spellcasting chances with Divine Wrath characters. So now all of a sudden all of your spellcasters can be extremely tanky while you're using them to help fight in the front lines, whereas your, you know, Necromancer with the Undead, or your other sorcerers for the Skaven, or the Cult of the Possessed, you know, they're going to need to be in light armor if you want them to be spellcasters, or else you're going to really affect your ability to successfully cast your spells. And then, as we talked about, you either, on a good day, if you just fail your spell, nothing's going to happen. But if you get a really bad roll and you trigger a curse, then it could be a one-shot kill of your unit, or hurt everybody that's around you. So that can definitely be a big issue. Now, that one of their henchmen is called the Sisters, and that they can be really nice to help you gather the warp stone, because when you pick them up, they then get increased movement, and that lasts for 2 turns. So effectively, that can help you really rush to get a bunch of warp stone, because as you're putting them in heavy armor, it's going to decrease their movement, and that'll help negate it a little bit and help you get more warp stone, because that's kind of the whole crux of this game, is you're going into Mordheim to collect the stone to help pay for your warband, to help gain support from your faction leaders that are going to be funding your what would you call this, adventure, I guess. And then you also are going to be selling it to other factions on the black market. That way you can end up affording to spend a lot of money on your skills, and you're purchasing better units and equipment and formulas, especially once you get good formulas, so you can start enchanting your more rare weapons to give them even better traits. And all that's going to cost a lot of money, and you're going to need as much warpstone as possible to get that. They get access to the Wolf Priest, who is a great buffer. He's also a good damage dealer, and again, he has that Divine Wrath, so you can kit him out in heavy armor, and all that can be make him incredibly durable. And then what's cool about the impressive for the Sisters is not only do they have all this healing, but then their impressive is the only impressive unit in the game that can wear heavy armor, so that can make them even tankier. And then all of your henchmen can wear heavy armor too, and then they can all wear shields as well. So again, you can just create these incredibly tanky units that are just damn near impossible to kill, especially when you're spamming healing every turn. Now, there are some downsides to the Sisters, and this is what can be a little bit challenging for newer players, is because you have so many different spellcasters for so many different units. The Sisters are by far the most expensive faction to play, because you have to pay for both your basic skills, but then you also have to pay for your spells. And then when you put these guys into training, especially if you're going to mastering abilities, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be training throughout a lot of the game. So you're going to have lots of different people in your roster to be able to keep running missions. And so because of that, you're going to have lots of expenses that you're going to have to do. So you're going to need to gather lots of warpstone and just always be very aware of what your financial situation is. Likewise, because you're going to be having so many different characters that can wear so many different pieces of equipment, you're going to need to be having lots of different pieces of equipment. Now, once they're training, you can take the equipment off and kind of shuffle it around, so you don't necessarily have to have double great pieces of equipment, but you are going to have quite a bit more expense, because depending on how far into the game you are, you're going to want to have, you know, those Sigmarite Warhammers if you're going to be running a Warhammer shield build, or Great Hammers if you're going to use them to spam healing, because they'll typically have a decreased chance to trigger the Divine Wrath, unless you can find 2 purple Sigmarite Warhammers with really good devotion abilities, because I think if you have 2 of them fully kitted out with the devotion, which lowers the Divine Wrath penalty, and then the passive decreased Divine Wrath that both the Warhammers will give you and the Great Hammer, I think that will overcome the bonuses for a fully kitted out Great Hammer, which is a 2-handed weapon, which is, I suppose I should specify, whereas the Warhammer is a 1-handed weapon. But I'd have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's how the numbers would work on that if you're running it that way. But again, that just means you're going to have more units with more equipment and more expense to get them going to help you. The other thing you got to be careful of is, you know, like we talked about, is your spellcasters, because they can trigger Divine Wrath, you can kill yourself. And if you've watched my playthrough, there were missions where I killed my units trying to heal, and some of those kills were for really minor healing. So you have to be very cognizant that, especially on story missions where it's an all, you know, you either pass it or you don't, and then if you fail it, you get some experience, but you suffer any of the injuries, because you probably have injuries if you're failing the mission, and you don't get any of the equipment to come with you. So that can be a very big issue. Because you're having to put so much money into all these guys, it can really take some time for the Sisters Sigmar to pop off and really start doing a lot of damage and really become the ultimate tanks that they can be. But by the middle to late game, these guys are really very powerful and can be a real nuisance when you're actually playing against them, because the AI likes to make them real tanky too, and that can definitely be a big issue. Now, the other downside to these guys is there's really minimal range options. So they do, because so many of their units are spellcasters, you do have the Sigmar comment, which is like a ranged attack spell, but again, you have to worry about Divine Wrath being triggered. They do have access to the Smuggler, which will just be a gunpowder based ranged unit if you wanted to use them as a range, but they're by early game range sucks, but by late game it can be very powerful, so you do kind of feel that a little bit by having the lack of ranged options. And then because you're having to put so many guys into training and spend all this money, it can be actually kind of difficult to progress your units and level them really quick and get them fully equipped, just because of the sheer amount of expense that goes along with it. But really, if you're just spamming Wordstone missions, then you should be able to get it through. But those would be kind of the downsides to the sisters. So for the Skaven here, I would say kind of the big thing for them is, again, I kind of going back and forth between the Witch Hunters and the Skaven. Maybe the Witch Hunters are a little easier than the Skaven if you're taking them into like a global consideration. But for the most part, the Skaven have a really rough start, but by mid and late game, they're hands down a very easy faction once you get them kind of over the hump. And I'll kind of go over why they can be difficult when I get into the cons section. But the biggest thing is these guys are all about doing lots of damage. They easily are the highest, well, one of the highest DPS factions in the game. They're very fast, so they have high initiative. So it's not uncommon, especially if you're playing against them, that they will move their whole army before you get to move a couple of your units. So once you're getting into those engagements, that means they can do tons of attacks, weaken down your guys, add debuffs, buff their own guys, heal their guys, really kind of affect you, and can easily assassinate any units that may overextend. And they can make that even more of a effect when because they're one of the few factions in the game that have access to poison weapons. And so that once they attack you, and that's what the Skaven have in their hands there, that's one of the poison weapons there, those poison blades. And then for every time they hit you, it'll apply a poison, and then that'll do damage for you. I think it lasts for 2 turns, so that can be rough, because if you don't have a healer nearby and they're almost near death, then all of a sudden you're suffering losses there. And then they also have access to the Warpstone pistols, and so every time they hit you with those Warpstone pistols, it reduces your melee and ranged resistance, so it makes it easier for everybody else to hit you as well. So that definitely can take some effects onto you here. Now, the other thing is that they have access to really great healing. They do have access to the Poison Globadier. In fact, that's where these guys really came out of, is they are a Skaven Globadier, if you're aware of the faction here. And so that will allow them to do great amount of healing for all the reasons that we discussed with the Skaven, or with the Undead here. And then they also have access to the Sorcerer, and he has some of the greatest debuffs that you can apply to other units. He also has really great abilities to buff up your own units, so he can give you immunity to fear, terror, all lone checks, because that's one of the downsides to the Skaven, is they're typically not very brave and they have low morale. So once you start killing them, you can trigger their morale checks pretty easily and make them run away. I would say out of every faction, these guys can make some of the greatest crit armies if you want to do a crit build, because they have passive abilities which will increase your crit chance with certain weapons, and then they also have access to abilities that if you're willing to sacrifice some health, that they'll increase the amount of damage output your guys use. And because you have the Poison Globadiers, you can easily heal them, and so it doesn't matter that they're suffering that damage, because you're going to be able to make up the difference here with the healing. And then the other thing that makes these guys generally much easier than other factions in this aspect early on and then throughout the whole game is the Warpstone, or the Warp Guards. They're immune to the effects of the Warpstone. So how it works is when you're running around the map picking up the Warpstone, it tends to cause you to have to roll for either suffering positive or negative traits, and usually you get a bunch of negative traits, and some of them can be really devastating. And they, especially if you're picking up a whole pile of Warpstone, you can get a bunch of debuffs all stacked up on each other, and it can last for several turns, so it can really affect you by the time you're engaging the opponent. Whereas with these Warpstone guards, they're completely immune to that debuff. And then because a lot of the units have a lot of strength, they typically have a lot of carrying capacity. and for their main, so therefore you can carry more equipment when you're to get you more money. So their main cons is they have low HP, they have a lot of item restrictions. You know, you have to find the warpstone pistols. Their main ranged units use something called shurikens, and then you really only will have access to those if you find them in chests or if you're fighting against other Skaven factions, and who you're fighting is completely random. So if you have really bad matchups like I did, where I wasn't fighting a lot of Skaven, I couldn't find good shurikens for most of the playthrough. And likewise, your impressive unit is reliant on bracers, and again, that requires you to be fighting other Skaven factions. So if you're not doing that, you're not going to find good bracers unless you find it on the find it in chest. And then finally, the ogre can be so detrimental to the start, because if you have an impressive, the AI is going to bring an impressive unit with it, and if yours is stupid and not doing anything, then you're going to end up getting yourself killed, because an impressive can easily solo several henchmen and possibly even the heroes if you get a good matchup on there, and especially if they're weakened, and it becomes just a one-on-one battle. But if you have the sorcerer, you can nullify that with the guidance, but again, then you're wasting the sorcerer's movement and ability points to try to make the ogre become viable. And because the Skaven already have such low HP and have a rougher start, it just kind of compounds and makes the start very difficult. But then as you level them up, it becomes much less of an issue, because you get the lucidity with formula, which increases the chance of you passing a stupidity check. It becomes less reliant on you keeping the sorcerer nearby the rat ogre, and then it kind of becomes less of an issue, and then you can just keep them by themselves, and you don't necessarily have to bring the sorcerer with you all the time, because the rat ogre will become self-sufficient. Now once the rat ogre gets into combat, you no longer have to worry about any of those stupidity checks, because in combat it'll just automatically start attacking and not have issues. You'll still control it while it's in combat. It's not like it's going to be all automatically happening, but if you fail that stupidity check, it just automatically causes you to fail the issue here. So, or fail the check, and then it just ends your turn, which can be completely devastating. So I'll talk about the next three factions next time. I'm going to cut it a little bit short here, because as you may hear in the background, we're having a huge storm, and we're having some hail and things like that, and some weather sirens and stuff are starting to go off. So I just don't want that to start blaring in the background and causing a lot of issues with the audio. So thanks for watching, and next time we will talk about the witch hunters, mercenaries, and the cult of the possessed. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe, because we post more content for you. Have a great day.